Lyra Vexthara walked into the classroom like she owned the place. Her blue skin shimmered under the lights, and her forearms moved with perfect control. Other students quickly looked away when she passed by. They knew better than to stare at the smartest and most dangerous student in the academy. The Galactic Science Academy on Zephyr Prime was the best school in known space. Only the brightest minds from across the galaxy could study here. But even among these brilliant students, Lyra stood out. She was only 19 years old, but she had already solved problems that made grown professors cry. Lyra took her usual seat in the front row. She placed her 4 hands on the desk and waited. The other students whispered behind her, but she could hear every word with her sharp ears. Some called her a genius, others called her a monster. Lyra preferred monster. It meant they feared her. Professor Kethmoran entered the room looking tired. He was an old Zephyrian with gray skin and 6 arms that moved slowly. For 50 years, he had taught the brightest students in the galaxy. But in the last 3 years, one student had made his life very difficult. "Good morning, class," Professor Kethmoran said. His voice sounded weak. "Good morning, Professor," the students replied. All except Lyra. She just stared at him with her bright purple eyes. Professor Kethmoran walked to the board and began writing equations. These were advanced quantum physics problems that usually took students hours to solve, but before he could finish writing the first problem, Lyra spoke up. "The answer is 47.6, she said in a bored voice. Professor Kethmoran stopped writing. He looked at the half-finished equation on the board. "Lyra, I have not even finished writing the problem yet." "You do not need to," Lyra said. She stood up and walked to the board. Her 4 arms moved quickly as she wrote out the complete solution. This problem is based on the Henderson theory, which has 3 major flaws. First, it assumes that quantum particles behave the same way in all dimensions. Second, it ignores the effect of gravity on small particles. Third, Henderson never tested his theory with real experiments. The other students watched in silence. They had seen this happen many times before. Lyra would solve problems instantly, then explain why the problems were wrong in the first place. Professor Kethmoran felt his heart sink. This was exactly what had happened with the last 5 professors who tried to teach Lyra. She would embarrass them in front of the class, prove their lessons were too easy, and make them feel like fools. "Perhaps you would like to suggest a better problem?" Professor Kethmoran asked. He tried to keep his voice steady, but everyone could hear the defeat in it. Lyra smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Professor, with respect, I have already learned everything you plan to teach this semester. I read all the books last week. I also read the books for next semester, and the semester after that. Your teaching methods are outdated, and your knowledge is limited." The classroom was completely quiet. Some students looked shocked, others looked embarrassed for their professor. A few looked angry at Lyra's rudeness. Professor Kethmoran had been teaching for 50 years. He had won awards for his research. He had trained hundreds of successful scientists. But this 19-year-old girl made him feel like he knew nothing. "Class dismissed," he said quietly. The students quickly gathered their things and left. They did not want to be there when Professor Kethmoran finally lost his temper. But Lyra took her time. She packed her books slowly and walked past the professor's desk. "Do not take it personally, Professor," she said. "It is not your fault that Zephyrians are the smartest species in the galaxy. Other races simply cannot keep up with us." After Lyra left, Professor Kethmoran sat alone in his classroom. This was the 3rd time this month that she had made him look foolish. The Academy board was already asking questions. They wanted to know why their best professor could not handle one student. But Lyra was not just any student. She was the daughter of the Zephyrian Science Council leader. Her family was rich and powerful. The Academy could not simply expel her, no matter how much trouble she caused. Professor Kethmoran walked to his office and sat behind his desk. He opened his computer and began typing a message. It was a long shot, but he had no other choice. He was writing to the Human Education Council on a planet called Earth. Humans were a young species. They had only discovered space travel 200 years ago. Most aliens thought humans were primitive and not very smart. But Professor Kethmoran had heard interesting stories about human teachers. They used strange methods that other species did not understand. He finished typing his message and sent it across the galaxy. He asked for their most unusual teacher, someone who could handle impossible students, someone who was not afraid to try new ideas. 3 weeks later, Professor Keth Morin received a reply. The humans were sending someone. Her name was Kate Morrison. She was 34 years old and had taught difficult students before. Her methods were described as unorthodox and highly effective. Professor Keth Morin felt hope for the first time in months. Maybe this human could do what no Zephyrian professor could do. Maybe she could teach Lyra Vexthara that she was not as smart as she thought. The Academy board was not happy about hiring a human. They thought it was embarrassing to ask a primitive species for help, but they were desperate. Lyra had already driven away their 5 best professors. If they could not find someone to control her, they would have to expel her, and expelling the daughter of a council leader would cause serious political problems. "One human teacher," the board leader said. "If she fails like all the others, we will have no choice but to remove Lyra from the Academy." Professor Keth Morin nodded. He understood the stakes. This was their last chance. Kate Morrison would arrive in 2 weeks. Professor Keth Morin spent that time preparing. He read everything he could find about human teaching methods. Most of it made no sense to him. Humans seemed to value creativity over logic. They encouraged students to make mistakes. They worked in groups instead of competing against each other. These ideas went against everything Zephyrians believed about education. Zephyrian students learned by memorizing facts and solving problems faster than their classmates. The smartest students, like Lyra, learned to dominate others with their intelligence. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe Lyra needed a teacher who did not think like a Zephyrian. When the day finally came, Professor Keth Morin went to the spaceport to meet Kate Morrison. He expected to see a tall, impressive human. Instead, he met a woman with brown hair that was turning gray. She wore simple clothes and carried only one small bag. "Professor Morrison?" he asked. "Just Kate," she said with a smile. "And you must be Professor Keth Morin. Thank you for inviting me to your academy." Professor Keth Morin was surprised by her casual manner. Zephyrian teachers were formal and serious. This human seemed relaxed and friendly. "I should warn you," he said as they walked through the academy halls. "Lyra Vexthara is not like other students. She is brilliant but also very difficult. 5 professors have already given up trying to teach her." Kate nodded. "I read her file. She sounds challenging. I like challenging students." "She will try to embarrass you in front of the class," Professor Keth Morin continued. "She will solve your problems before you finish explaining them. She will tell you that your methods are wrong and your knowledge is outdated." "Interesting," Kate said. "What happens after she does all that?" Professor Keth Morin looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what does she do next? After she proves she is the smartest person in the room?" She waits for the professor to give up and leave." Kate smiled again. "Well, I guess she might be waiting a long time with me. I do not give up very easily." Professor Keth Morin felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this strange human teacher really could handle Lyra Vexthara. Maybe she could do what no one else had managed to do. Tomorrow, Kate Morrison would meet the most difficult student in the galaxy, and Lyra would meet a teacher unlike any she had ever faced before. The next morning, Lyra walked into her quantum physics classroom expecting another easy victory. Professor Keth Morin had told the class that they would have a new teacher. Lyra did not care. New teachers were just new targets for her to destroy. She took her usual seat in the front row and waited. The other students whispered nervously. They had heard rumors that the new teacher was from Earth. Most of them had never seen a human before. The door opened, and Kate Morrison walked in. Lyra looked at her with surprise. The human was smaller than she expected. Her hair was brown with gray streaks, and she wore simple clothes that looked old. She carried a worn bag and moved with a relaxed walk. "Good morning, everyone," Kate said with a warm smile. "My name is Kate Morrison, but you can call me Kate. I am here from Earth to be your new teacher." Lyra studied this strange creature. Humans only had 2 arms and no telepathic abilities. They were supposed to be one of the dumbest species in the galaxy. This would be even easier than usual. "I know you are all very advanced students," Kate continued. "Professor Keth Morin told me you are the brightest minds on Zephyr Prime. I am excited to learn from you as much as I hope to teach you. Lyra almost laughed out loud. Learn from them? This primitive human thought she could learn something from Zephyrian students? This was going to be fun. Kate walked to the board and began writing a simple equation. It was basic quantum mechanics, the kind of problem first-year students solved. Lyra felt insulted. "Who can solve this for me?" Kate asked. Lyra did not even bother to raise her hand. She used all 4 arms to write quickly on her tablet. In 30 seconds, she had solved the problem 3 different ways. She held up her tablet for everyone to see. "The answer is 12.4, Lyra announced. "I also solved it using the Mitchell method and the quantum bridge theory. This problem is far too simple for advanced students like us." Kate looked at Lyra's work and nodded. "Very impressive, Lyra. You solved it perfectly and very quickly." Lyra waited for Kate to look embarrassed or angry, but the human just smiled and erased the board. "Now let me show you something more interesting," Kate said. She began writing a new equation. This one was much longer and more complex. Lyra watched with growing interest. She had never seen this type of problem before. "This is a theoretical framework for harvesting energy from dimensional rifts," Kate explained. "It requires both advanced mathematics and creative thinking." Lyra stared at the equation. She understood the mathematics, but there was something strange about it. The problem seemed to bend the rules of traditional physics. Parts of it made no logical sense. She began working on her tablet, using all her computational skills. Her 4 arms moved quickly as she tried different approaches, but after 10 minutes she still had no answer. Other students were also struggling. They whispered to each other and looked confused. No one could solve Kate's problem. "I do not understand," said Mira, another smart student. "This equation breaks several laws of physics." "Does it?" Kate asked. "Or does it reveal that those laws are incomplete?" Lyra felt frustrated. She had never failed to solve a problem before. She decided to use her secret weapon. Quietly, she activated her telepathic abilities and tried to read Kate's mind. If she could see the answer in the teacher's thoughts, she could solve the problem. But something strange happened. When Lyra tried to enter Kate's mind, she hit a wall. There was nothing there. It was like Kate's thoughts were completely blocked. Kate looked directly at Lyra and smiled. "Having trouble with your telepathy?" Lyra's purple eyes went wide. How did Kate know what she was doing? Kate reached into her bag and pulled out a small device that looked like a headband. "This is a psi shield," she explained. "Human technology. It blocks telepathic intrusion." The other students gasped. They had never heard of such a device. Telepathy was supposed to be impossible to block. "But that is cheating," Lyra said angrily. "You are using technology to hide your thoughts." "Is it cheating?" Kate asked calmly. "Or is using telepathy to read my mind the real cheating?" Lyra felt her face turn darker blue with embarrassment. She had been caught trying to cheat, and this primitive human had outsmarted her. "Let me ask you something, Lyra," Kate continued. "When you use your telepathy in class, are you learning, or are you just taking shortcuts?" "I am using my natural abilities," Lyra replied defensively. "And that is fine for some things," Kate said. "But what happens when you face a problem that cannot be solved by reading someone else's mind? What happens when you have to rely on just your own thinking?" Lyra did not answer. She had never thought about that before. Kate walked back to the board. "This problem requires something your species is not used to. It requires intuition. It requires making logical leaps without complete information. It requires creativity." She began explaining the solution. As she talked, Lyra realized that Kate's approach was completely different from Zephyrian methods. The human did not follow step-by-step logic. Instead, she made educated guesses and tested them. She combined ideas from different fields of science. She used imagination as much as mathematics. "The key," Kate explained, "is not to solve the equation in order. You have to work backwards from what you want to achieve. Then you fill in the gaps with creative solutions." Lyra watched in amazement as Kate demonstrated the solution. It was brilliant, but it broke every rule of proper Zephyrian problem solving. No Zephyrian would ever approach a problem this way. "How did you know to do that?" asked Tom, another student. "Experience," Kate said, "and a willingness to be wrong." In human schools, we teach students that failure is part of learning. You cannot discover new things if you are afraid to make mistakes. Lyra felt something she had never experienced before. She felt small. For the first time in her life, she was looking at someone who knew things she did not know. Someone who could think in ways she could not think. Your homework for tonight, Kate announced, is to solve 3 problems using intuitive methods. Do not use computers. Do not use telepathy. Use only your imagination and your ability to make educated guesses. After class, the other students left quickly. They were excited and confused by their new teacher, but Lyra stayed behind. She had questions. Professor Morrison, she said formally. Just Kate, the human corrected. Kate, I do not understand your teaching methods. They go against everything we learn about proper scientific thinking. Kate sat on the edge of her desk. Tell me, Lyra, how many Zephyrian scientists have made major discoveries in the last 100 years? Lyra thought about it. We have perfected many existing theories. We have made calculations more accurate. We have solved complex problems. But have you discovered anything completely new? Have you found new laws of physics or invented new types of science? Lyra realized with shock that the answer was no. Zephyrians were excellent at improving existing knowledge, but they rarely created entirely new ideas. Humans, Kate continued, are not as smart as Zephyrians in many ways. We cannot calculate as fast as you. We do not have telepathic abilities, but we are very good at imagining things that do not exist yet. We are good at finding new ways to look at old problems. But that seems so random, Lyra said. It is random, Kate agreed. And that is exactly why it works. When you only use logic, you can only find logical answers. But the universe is not always logical. Sometimes the best solutions come from thinking in illogical ways. Lyra left the classroom with her mind spinning. Everything she believed about intelligence and learning had been challenged in 1 hour. This human teacher had shown her a completely different way of thinking. For the first time in her life, Lyra Vexthara felt like she had something to learn. Lyra spent the whole night trying to solve Kate's homework problems. She sat at her desk for hours, staring at equations that seemed impossible. Every time she tried to use logical steps, she hit a dead end. Every time she tried to calculate the answer, the numbers led nowhere. She had never struggled with homework before. Usually she finished assignments in minutes. But Kate's problems required something different. They required her to guess, to imagine, to think in ways that felt uncomfortable and wrong. By morning, Lyra had only solved 1 problem out of 3. She felt frustrated and angry. When she walked into class, she was ready for a fight. Kate noticed Lyra's mood immediately. How did the homework go? She asked the class. Most students looked embarrassed. They had struggled just as much as Lyra. But instead of being upset, Kate seemed pleased. Good, she said. Struggle means you are learning. If the homework was easy, I would know I was not teaching you anything new. Lyra raised one of her 4 hands. Professor Kate, I could only solve 1 problem. This has never happened to me before. And how does that make you feel? Kate asked. Angry, Lyra said honestly, and confused. Perfect, Kate replied. Anger and confusion are the beginning of real learning. When you feel comfortable, you are not growing. Kate began explaining the homework solutions. But instead of just giving the answers, she showed the students how to think through problems when they did not know what to do. When you are stuck, she explained, do not try harder, try differently. Ask yourself what would happen if the rules were different. Ask yourself what the problem would look like from another angle. She drew pictures on the board to represent abstract concepts. She told stories to explain complex theories. She had students work together in small groups, sharing ideas and building on each other's thoughts. Everything about Kate's teaching was strange to Lyra. In Zephyrian schools, students worked alone. They competed against each other to see who was smartest. Teachers gave lectures, and students memorized information. But Kate's classroom felt different. Students talked to each other. They shared ideas freely. They asked questions without fear of looking stupid. Even when they gave wrong answers, Kate found something positive to say about their thinking. In human culture, Kate explained during one lesson, we have a saying, Two heads are better than one. We believe that people working together can solve problems that no individual could solve alone. Lyra found this idea shocking. Zephyrians believed that intelligence was an individual trait. The smartest person should work alone to avoid being slowed down by others. But when Kate divided the class into groups, something interesting happened. Lyra was paired with Mira and Tom, two students she usually ignored because they were not as smart as her. Their group assignment was to design a new type of energy source. Lyra immediately began calculating mathematical models, but Mira suggested they first think about what kind of energy the galaxy actually needed. Tom wondered if they could use waste products from existing energy sources. At first, Lyra was impatient with their simple ideas, but as they talked, she realized that their questions were helping her think about the problem in new ways. Her calculations became more focused, her solutions became more practical. By the end of class, their group had designed an energy system that was both mathematically sound and practically useful. Lyra had to admit that working with others had made her ideas better. After several weeks of Kate's classes, Lyra began to notice changes in herself. She still solved problems faster than other students, but she no longer felt the need to prove her superiority. She started listening to other people's ideas. She started asking questions instead of just giving answers. One day, Kate assigned a project that would take several weeks to complete. Each student had to choose an unsolved scientific problem and develop a new approach to solving it. "I do not want you to solve the problem," Kate explained. "I want you to find a new way of thinking about it. I want you to challenge the assumptions that other scientists have made." Lyra chose the energy crisis affecting the Outer Rim colonies. For decades, Zephyrian scientists had tried to solve this problem using traditional methods. They had built bigger power plants and more efficient distribution systems, but the colonies still did not have enough energy. Lyra spent days reading research papers and studying energy theories. She learned that every previous solution had focused on generating more power. No one had questioned whether the colonies actually needed that much power in the first place. She began to think about the problem differently. What if the solution was not to make more energy, but to use energy more cleverly? What if they could harvest energy from sources that other scientists had ignored? Using Kate's intuitive methods, Lyra started making creative connections. She thought about how human pioneers had survived on Earth with limited resources. She considered how energy moved through natural systems. She imagined entirely new ways of thinking about power and efficiency. Slowly, an idea began to form. It was wild and unconventional. Most Zephyrian scientists would think it was crazy, but Kate had taught her that crazy ideas sometimes led to breakthrough discoveries. During one of their classes, Kate shared stories about famous human discoveries. She told them about scientists who were laughed at by their colleagues, but later proved to be right. "Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin by accident," Kate said. "He left some bacteria. A culture's out too long, and they got contaminated with mold. Most scientists would have thrown them away. But Fleming looked at the contamination and wondered if it might be useful." She told them about Marie Curie, who studied radioactive materials that other scientists thought were too dangerous. She talked about Albert Einstein, who imagined what it would be like to ride on a beam of light. "The biggest discoveries," Kate explained, "usually come from people who are willing to look foolish. They ask questions that seem stupid. They try experiments that seem impossible. They think thoughts that no one else dares to think." Lyra found these stories inspiring. She had always been afraid of being wrong because Zephyrian culture punished failure. But Kate's stories showed her that being wrong was often the first step toward being right in a completely new way. As her project developed, Lyra began to feel excited about learning in a way she never had before. She was not just memorizing information or solving existing problems. She was creating something entirely new. She started staying after class to talk with Kate about her ideas. The human teacher listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. She never told Lyra that her ideas were wrong. Instead, she helped Lyra think through the implications of her theories. "What would happen if your energy system failed?" Kate would ask. "How would you test your theory safely? What would other scientists say about your approach?" These conversations helped Lyra refine her ideas and anticipate potential problems. But more importantly, they showed her what it meant to have a teacher who was truly interested in helping her learn and grow. One day, as they were discussing Lyra's project, Kate said something that surprised her. "You know, Lyra, when I first read your file, I was told you were impossible to teach. But I think the problem was not that you could not learn. The problem was that no one was teaching you anything worth learning." Lyra looked at Kate with new understanding. "You mean I was not the problem?" "Oh, you were definitely a problem," Kate said with a smile. "But you were the right kind of problem. You were bored and unchallenged. You were using your intelligence to cause trouble because no one was giving you anything interesting to do with it." For the first time, Lyra understood why she had been so difficult in her previous classes. She had not been trying to hurt her teachers. She had been trying to find someone who could teach her something she did not already know. Kate Morrison was that teacher, and now Lyra was finally ready to learn. 3 months into the semester, something happened that had never happened before in Lyra's life. She raised her hand in class and said the words that no one expected to hear from her. "Kate, I need help." The classroom went completely silent. Other students stared at Lyra in shock. The smartest student in the academy was asking for help. It seemed impossible. Kate did not look surprised or pleased. She simply nodded as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "What can I help you with?" Kate asked. Lyra felt embarrassed, but she forced herself to continue. "I have been working on my energy project for weeks. I have a theory that might work, but I cannot figure out how to test it safely. Every approach I try seems too dangerous or too expensive." Kate walked over to Lyra's desk and looked at her notes. Lyra had filled dozens of pages with calculations and diagrams. Her handwriting, done with all 4 arms working at once, covered every available space. "This is fascinating work," Kate said, after studying the papers. "You are thinking about energy in a completely new way. But you are right about the testing problem. This would be very difficult to prove using traditional methods." Kate sat down next to Lyra. "Let me ask you something. When human scientists have this kind of problem, what do we do?" Lyra thought about the stories Kate had told in class. "You start with small experiments? You test parts of the theory instead of the whole thing?" "Exactly," Kate said. "And what else? You ask other people for help?" Kate smiled. "Very good. So instead of trying to solve this alone, why do not we get the whole class involved? Maybe someone else will see an approach that we are missing." Lyra felt nervous about sharing her work with other students. What if they thought her ideas were stupid? What if they stole her research? In Zephyrian culture, students protected their work jealously. But Kate had taught her that collaboration often led to better results than competition. Maybe it was worth the risk. "Okay," Lyra said quietly. "I will share it with the class." Kate called everyone's attention. "Lyra has been working on a very interesting project, and she needs our help with a testing problem. Would you like to present your work, Lyra?" Lyra stood up and walked to the front of the classroom. Her hearts were beating fast. She had given many presentations before, but always to show off her superiority. This was different. This time, she was asking for help. "I have been studying the energy crisis in the Outer Rim colonies," she began. "Most solutions focus on generating more power, but I think the real problem is that we are wasting energy we already have." She began drawing diagrams on the board, explaining her theory with all 4 arms working together. Her idea was to create a network of energy collectors that could harvest power from quantum fluctuations in space itself. "The theory is sound," she continued, "but I cannot figure out how to build a safe prototype. The energy levels required for testing could be dangerous." When she finished, the classroom was quiet for a moment. Then Tom raised his hand. "What if you tested it in virtual reality first?" he suggested. "You could simulate the quantum field without actually creating one." Mira added, "And maybe you could start with a much smaller version. Instead of trying to power a whole colony, maybe you could power just one building." Other students began offering ideas. Lisa suggested using existing quantum laboratories instead of building new ones. Ben wondered if they could partner with other schools to share resources and risks. Lyra listened to all their suggestions with growing excitement. Each idea sparked new possibilities in her mind. Problems that had seemed impossible began to look solvable. "These are all excellent ideas," she said. "I had not thought of any of these approaches." Kate watched with satisfaction as the class worked together to help Lyra. This was exactly what she had hoped would happen. Lyra was learning that her intelligence was not something to use against others, but something to share with others. After class, Lyra stayed behind to talk with Kate. "I do not understand," she said. "Why did everyone want to help me? In the past, other students avoided me because they thought I would make them look stupid." Kate leaned against her desk. "What has changed, Lyra? How have you been different in class lately?" Lyra thought about it. "I have been listening more, asking questions instead of just giving answers. I have not been trying to prove I am smarter than everyone else." "And how do you think that makes other students feel?" "Less afraid of me?" Lyra guessed. "Exactly. When you stopped using your intelligence as a weapon, other people stopped seeing you as a threat. Now they see you as a colleague, someone they can work with instead of someone they have to compete against." This was a completely new idea for Lyra. In Zephyrian society, intelligence was always competitive. Smart people were supposed to dominate less smart people, but Kate was teaching her a different way to think about intelligence. "On Earth," Kate continued, "we believe that the smartest person in the room is not the one who knows the most. The smartest person is the one who helps everyone else get smarter." Lyra spent the next few weeks working with her classmates to develop her project. They met after classes and on weekends. They shared resources and knowledge freely. When someone had a good idea, everyone celebrated together. For the first time, Lyra experienced what it felt like to be part of a team. She discovered that working with others did not make her less smart. It made her ideas better and stronger. Her project began to take shape in ways she never could have achieved alone. Tom's virtual reality simulations allowed her to test dangerous theories safely. Mira's engineering skills helped her design practical prototypes. Lisa's research found existing equipment they could use. But the biggest change was in Lyra herself. She began to behave differently in all her classes, not just Kate's. When other professors made mistakes, she pointed them out gently instead of mockingly. When classmates struggled with problems, she offered help instead of showing off. Her other teachers noticed the change immediately. Professor Kethmoran could hardly believe it was the same student who had terrorized his classroom just a few months earlier. "What has Professor Morrison done to her?" he asked other faculty members. "Lyra is actually helpful now. She raises her hand to ask questions instead of to embarrass me." The other professors were amazed, too. They had expected the human teacher to fail like all the others. Instead, she had accomplished something that seemed impossible. She had tamed Lyra Vexthara. But Kate knew that taming was the wrong word. She had not broken Lyra's spirit or reduced her intelligence. She had simply redirected Lyra's energy toward positive goals instead of negative ones. During one of their after-class conversations, Kate shared something personal with Lyra. "When I was young," Kate said, "I was a lot like you. I was smart and angry and difficult. I used my intelligence to hurt other people because I thought it made me special." Lyra was surprised. Kate always seemed so calm and confident. "What changed?" "I met a teacher who saw potential in me instead of just problems. He showed me that intelligence without kindness is just fancy cruelty. He taught me that the goal of being smart is not to be better than other people. The goal is to make the world better for everyone." "Is that why you became a teacher?" Lyra asked. Kate nodded. "I wanted to help other difficult students find better ways to use their gifts. Students like you." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest that she had never experienced before. Someone believed in her. Someone saw her not as a problem to be solved, but as a person with valuable potential. "Kate," she said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on me." Kate smiled. "Thank you for letting me help you learn who you really are." As the semester continued, Lyra's transformation became even more dramatic. She started tutoring younger students who were struggling with basic concepts. She volunteered for group projects instead of insisting on working alone. She even apologized to professors she had embarrassed in the past. But the most important change was that Lyra was finally happy. For the first time in her life, she she was using her incredible intelligence in ways that felt fulfilling and meaningful. She was not just showing off her abilities. She was using them to discover new knowledge and help other people. The impossible had happened. The untamable student had learned to tame herself. The day of final project presentations arrived, and the entire academy was buzzing with excitement. Word had spread that Lyra Vexthara, the impossible student, was going to present research that might solve the Outer Rim energy crisis. Even professors from other departments came to watch. Lyra stood at the front of the largest lecture hall in the academy. 6 months ago, she would have been showing off, trying to make everyone else feel stupid. Today, she felt nervous, but excited. She wanted to share something meaningful with her colleagues. For decades, Lyra began, we have tried to solve the Outer Rim energy crisis by building bigger power plants and better distribution systems. But what if we have been asking the wrong question? What if the problem is not that we need more energy, but that we are wasting the energy that already exists all around us? She activated a holographic display that showed her team's research. Working with Tom, Mira, Lisa, and Ben, they had developed a revolutionary approach to energy collection. Quantum physics tells us that empty space is not really empty, Lyra continued. It is filled with energy fluctuations that appear and disappear constantly. We call this quantum foam. Most scientists ignore this energy because it seems too small and random to be useful. The audience leaned forward with interest. Even the senior professors looked curious about where this was going. But my team discovered that these quantum fluctuations follow patterns. By using networks of collectors positioned at specific coordinates, we can harvest this background energy and convert it into usable power. Professor Kethmoran raised his hand. Lyra, this sounds fascinating, but how did you test such a theory? Quantum field manipulation is extremely dangerous. Lyra smiled. 6 months ago, she would have been annoyed by the interruption. Today, she was happy to answer questions. We used Tom's virtual reality simulations to test the theory safely, she said. Then we built small prototypes using equipment borrowed from 3 different universities. Mira designed the collection arrays, Lisa found the mathematical models for quantum field prediction, and Ben calculated the safety protocols. She showed data from their experiments. The results were impressive. Their small-scale tests had successfully harvested energy from quantum fluctuations with 90% efficiency. The beautiful thing about this system, Lyra continued, is that it requires no fuel, produces no waste, and can work anywhere in space. Each collector is small and simple, but when you network thousands of them together, they can power entire colonies. The audience erupted in excited whispers. Senior scientists began asking technical questions. Graduate students frantically took notes. Everyone could see that this was not just a good student project. This was a potential breakthrough that could change energy production across the galaxy. Dr. Zephyrin, the Academy's director, stood up. Miss Vexthara, this research is remarkable. How long would it take to build a full-scale test system? We estimate 18 months, Lyra replied. But we would need cooperation from multiple research institutions and significant funding. Consider it done, Dr. Zephyrin said immediately. This academy will provide whatever resources you need. After the presentation, dozens of professors and students surrounded Lyra with questions and congratulations. But the person she most wanted to see was Kate Morrison. She found Kate standing quietly at the back of the room, watching the excitement with a satisfied smile. So, Kate said when Lyra approached her, how does it feel to solve an impossible problem? Amazing, Lyra replied. But I could never have done it alone. Everything I learned about creative thinking, collaboration, and persistence came from your classes. Kate shook her head. I did not solve this problem, Lyra. You did. I just helped you discover that you had the tools you needed all along. But you changed everything for me, Lyra insisted. Before you came, I thought intelligence was about being better than other people. You taught me that real intelligence is about making things better for everyone. Kate looked proud, but also a little sad. Speaking of which, I have something to tell you. My exchange period is ending next month. I will be returning to Earth soon. Lyra felt her heart sink. She had known this day would come, but she was not ready for it. However, Kate continued, I have a proposal for you. The human university system has offered you a place in our advanced research program. You could continue your energy project on Earth, working with both human and alien scientists. Lyra was shocked. Leave Zephyr Prime? Leave the Academy? It is a big decision, Kate agreed. You would be giving up your privileged position here. Earth universities are not as prestigious as the Galactic Science Academy, but you would have the freedom to pursue unconventional research that might not be accepted here. Lyra thought about her life on Zephyr Prime. She had status, respect, and a guaranteed successful career. Her family expected her to become a leader in Zephyrian society. But she also thought about everything she had learned in the past 6 months. The joy of collaborative discovery, the excitement of asking questions no one had asked before, the satisfaction of using her intelligence to help others instead of dominating them. How long do I have to decide? She asked. 2 weeks, Kate said. Think carefully, Lyra. This choice will determine what kind of scientist you become, and what kind of person. Lyra spent those 2 weeks in deep thought. She talked to her family, who were horrified by the idea of their daughter studying with primitive humans. She consulted with Zephyrian professors, who warned her that leaving the academy would hurt her career prospects. But she also talked to her new friends, Tom, Mira, Lisa, and Ben. They supported whatever decision she made, but they also reminded her of how much she had grown since working with Kate. 6 months ago, you were the smartest person any of us knew, Mira said. But you were also the loneliest. Now you are still brilliant, but you are also kind and helpful and fun to be around. Do you want to go back to who you used to be? Lyra realized that Mira was right. If she stayed on Zephyr Prime, the pressure to conform to traditional Zephyrian values would be enormous. She might slowly drift back to her old patterns of behavior. On Earth, she could continue growing and learning in ways that her home planet would never allow. The night before Kate's departure, Lyra made her decision. She found Kate in her temporary office, packing her few belongings. I want to come with you, Lyra said simply. Kate looked up with a smile. Are you sure? You are giving up a lot. I am not giving up anything important, Lyra replied. I am gaining something much more valuable, the chance to become the person I really want to be. 3 days later, Lyra Vexthara stood in the spaceport, carrying 2 small bags containing everything she owned. Her family had come to see her off, though they still did not understand her decision. You are making a mistake, her father said sadly. Humans cannot teach you anything that Zephyrian professors do not already know. With respect, father, Lyra replied. The most important thing I learned from humans is that there is always more to learn. Always new ways to think. Always room to grow. As the transport ship prepared for departure, Professor Keth Morin approached her. Lyra, he said, I owe you an apology. For 3 years I thought you were an impossible student, but you were not impossible. You were just waiting for the right teacher. We were both learning, Professor, Lyra said gently. Maybe that is what education really is. Teachers and students growing together. Kate joined them at the boarding gate. Ready for your next adventure? She asked Lyra. Lyra looked back at the academy where she had spent her whole academic life. Then she looked forward to the ship that would take her to an uncertain but exciting future. Yes, she said with confidence. I am ready to learn. As the ship lifted off from Zephyr Prime, Lyra watched her home planet grow smaller through the viewport. She was no longer the arrogant prodigy who thought she knew everything. She was no longer the impossible student who could not be tamed. She was something much better. She was a learner, a collaborator, a scientist who would use her gifts to make the universe a better place for everyone. Years later, when other students asked Kate Morrison about her most challenging case, she would always talk about Lyra Vexthara. She taught me as much as I taught her, Kate would say. She showed me that there is no such thing as an impossible student. There are only students who have not yet found the right way to learn. And Lyra, now Dr. Lyra Vexthara, co-director of the Interspecies Energy Research Institute, would tell her own students the same thing Kate had taught her. Intelligence is not about being better than others. It is about making everything better for everyone. The impossible had become possible. The untamable student had learned the most important lesson of all, that the greatest discoveries come not from working alone, but from working together, and that the smartest person in any room is the one who helps everyone else become smarter too. In the end, Kate Morrison had not tamed Lyra Vex Thara. She had set her free.